In this world, everyone awakens a unique power except our protagonist. In a single night, his entire life was shattered. He lost his family, he lost his leg, and with it, he lost the courage to even step outside his door. Day after day, he existed like a walking corpse, breathing, but not truly living. Just when the last spark of hope was about to fade, his system finally awakened. But instead of a miracle, it gave him a cruel joke, a power so pathetically weak, it felt like fate was mocking him. Yet one small mistake changed everything, and that so-called useless ability began evolving into something far more terrifying than anyone could have imagined. A story begins on a battlefield where an undead warrior known as the Immortal King stands fully prepared for combat, calmly declaring that the opponent before him is not even worth calling a rival, and the warrior of light facing him, praised as the Knight of Light, answers with cool confidence that even if he does not see the Immortal King as worthy, as long as the light stands with him, victory is inevitable, and with that belief burning between them, they clash violently, only for the scene to suddenly pull back and reveal a young man watching everything from his room, commenting almost lazily that the fight looks overly dramatic, yet brushing it off as nothing more than a simple play. And still, a quiet doubt lingers in his mind as he wonders how everything ever ended up this way and why, if everyone was supposed to be the same, things became so divided. And then the story drifts far back to an earlier day when an investigator from the Skills Management Office arrives at his door to check whether he has awakened any power, and the boy, already weighed down by disappointment, admits that nothing has happened to him and likely never will, prompting the agent to apologize softly before leaving, while he reflects that this brief visit was his first human interaction in over 6 months, and may very well be the last time he opens his door for the rest of the year, thinking bitterly that some people might call him weak or pathetic, but in truth he sees himself as just another casualty of a cruel world. And before those thoughts can sink deeper, a news broadcast cuts in to report firefighters putting out a blaze caused by an awakened individual who went berserk before being transferred to another world, which shocks him and leads into the explanation that humanity began randomly awakening mysterious powers known as abilities. And once someone awakens, they are forcibly transported to another world within 24 hours, with only a rare few ever meeting the conditions to return. And because of that, many awakened people spiral into madness during their final hours on Earth. And 2 years earlier, one such desperate person destroyed the boy's family home and took one of his legs, leaving him trapped by fear ever since, unable to step outside without terror, yet still stubbornly trying to recover, even as he feels all his effort is meaningless and thinks that if only he could leave this cursed room, maybe everything would change. And right then a system notification suddenly appears, informing him that he is connecting to the Akasha system and about to awaken a unique ability called Avatar, giving him only 24 hours to prepare for transfer, which terrifies him as he protests that he is not ready and wonders if this is some cruel joke. But when he learns he will be forced to go regardless, he hurriedly gathers what little he can, aware that over a year will pass on Earth while 10 years flow in the other world. And with only minutes left, he hesitates at the portal, overwhelmed by fear and doubting what someone like him, weak and injured, can possibly do there. Yet in desperation, he activates his skill, and a clone suddenly appears before him, leaving him dizzy and nauseous as his vision splits between two bodies, forcing him to turn away because controlling both is unbearable. And with time running out, he bitterly concludes the ability is useless, muttering that even two of them together are worth less than one. And in a moment of despair, he wishes someone else could go in his place, only for the clone to obey that wish and be recognized by the system as the original, transporting it to the other world, where it awakens confused in a forest and receives notifications explaining karma, return conditions, and its complete lack of points. While the pain of controlling two bodies becomes unbearable, pushing him to cancel the avatar and vomit in relief back in his room, convinced he avoided disaster. Yet when he resummons the avatar and questions its value, the system announces a rare achievement for returning without using the karma shop, rewarding him with a dimensional gate and nearly 2 million karma, which he realizes came from the massive impact of defying the system itself and learning how karma works. He opens the shop and upgrades his physical condition without hesitation, feeling tingling turn into healing as his leg regenerates and his body recovers completely, pushing further until his recovery becomes a skill of its own, restoring his strength beyond normal. And with power still left to spend, he enhances his avatar ability, gaining full split consciousness and even a mental center that filters pain and emotion, allowing him to treat the other world like a game, though the growing number of avatars worries him, leading him to name them Hans and Heinz, each with shared traits and unique specialties. And while Hyun dislikes how weak they all feel, he sends Hans back through the gate and has Heinz clean the long-neglected trash outside, where Heinz notices his fear is gone thanks to mental control, and Hans finds himself at night in the other world, quickly ambushed by a beast, surviving only by using mana through his blade, barely winning and realizing how close to death he came, then reaching a village where the chief Malcolm warmly welcomes him. Impressed, he survived the forest, offering shelter and drink, giving Hans a rare moment of happiness among people, until he sleeps and unseen danger enters the room, and the scene cuts back back to Hyun reflecting on the experience when a sudden notification strikes him with terror, announcing Hans has died and all improvements are restored, making Hyun realize too late that Hans was poisoned, blaming himself for trusting strangers, while the story briefly shows the villagers mocking their prize before Hans awakens again as an undead. His class changed and a mysterious rotten heart skill gained, spared from madness only by the mental center, and as he observes the village's dark truth, he is ordered around by one of the men from the tavern, compelled to obey yet sensing the control feels familiar, something he might learn to use, and over a week he practices, mastering undead command enough to control another skeleton, discovering limits but also opportunity, killing a rat and reviving it as a spy named Alfred, sending it to listen to the Dark Wizard's conversations, where it overhears complaints about the village and nearly wanders into danger before instinct pulls it back. And as the man leaves the room, another shadowy figure appears, quietly praising him for a job well done. He muttered with clear irritation that the maturation of the immortal fragment was almost complete, and as usual he complained about being forced to handle such miserable work, grumbling that every time he entered that cursed place it felt like years were being shaved off his life, while the other man scoffed and told him to stop exaggerating, saying that even if the village chief were already dead, guarding this place still mattered, though the first man brushed it off, insisting it was pointless because with traps spread everywhere, no one could get inside even if they abandoned their posts, and all of this was quietly overheard by the protagonist, who absorbed every word and realized with sudden clarity that the so-called immortal fragment was exactly what had blocked his access to the warehouse before. And as he wondered where else he might gather useful information, disaster struck when his little rat spy was abruptly crushed, revealing the village chief himself, who looked confused as he remarked that he had sensed something unusual, adding that while an ordinary rat meant nothing, an undead one was strange enough to raise suspicion, perhaps influenced by whatever was stored in the warehouse, before snapping angrily and demanding to know which useless fool allowed the rat near the place they were supposed to guard. And hearing this, Hans quietly mourned the loss of his tiny spy, promising inwardly that revenge would come sooner or later, and that until then, Alfred would be watching from wherever he was. And the very next day, the man who had been scolded stormed into the area where Hans and the other undead stood, venting his rage by brutally beating them, only to pause and recognize one of them, mocking him by saying he had been much louder when alive, sneering as he recalled the words spoken before murdering his family, and cruelly joking that he could not repeat them now since his tongue would be cut out anyway, sarcastically praising what a good man he had been, while casually admitting that he had also killed the man's wife and dragged her here to join him. And in that moment, with the man's back turned, the undead victim rose and sank his teeth into the attacker's neck, sending him into panicked screams as he threatened to turn them to dust. But before he could finish, the undead wife seized him with her abilities, clamping his mouth shut so he could not cast magic, sealing his deserved end, an act orchestrated by Hans himself, who now, with greater command of dark magic, declared it was finally time for the victims to claim their rightful revenge. And outside at the village entrance, Heinz appeared, asking the guards whether they had seen his twin brother, only to be met with hostility as they ordered him to leave and insisted they had never seen any outsider. Yet Heinz pressed on, causing a scene that drew the village chief's attention, who tried to calm things down and send him away, but froze slightly upon seeing someone who looked exactly like Hans, and Heinz seized that opening, calmly introducing himself and stating that he knew his twin had been there, while at the same time the protagonist in his undead form slipped into the restricted area where the immortal fragment was kept, finding it absorbing powerful-looking corpses, which struck him as bitterly ironic since it meant it had been feeding on trash. And furious, he mocked the fragment for pretending to dine on fine food while actually devouring garbage, telling it that if it liked trash so much then it deserved exactly that, before embedding the fragment into his own chest, triggering a violent evolution that we momentarily leave behind as the scene cuts back to Heinz, who keeps insisting that he and his brother share a psychic connection and that he can feel Hans nearby, a claim the old man dismisses as nonsense, until suddenly he senses something terribly wrong with the fragment and rushes off, barking an order for the guards to kill that visiting bastard, only for them to find Heinz already gone, leaving them stunned and empty-handed. While elsewhere, Hans struggles to suppress the overwhelming power surging through him, admitting that without the mental center ability his sanity would have shattered, and after minutes of agony the system announces the evolution is complete, revealing a far more terrifying form in both magic and presence, though it warns that 2 more fragments will be needed for full completion. And as Hans gradually absorbs his new dark powers, one of the villains stands guard outside the warehouse complaining about the assignment, only to be interrupted by his boss through psychic contact, ordering him to pay close attention to whatever is happening inside, prompting him to call out to his former colleague, unaware that undead hands are already clawing through the doorway, followed by Hans casually greeting him about the nice weather, shocking the man who cannot believe that thing can speak, and in panic he hurls a dark spell at the door, only weakening it enough for the undead to burst through and crush him, after which Hans coldly remarks that this all happened because the man ignored his friendly greeting, then calmly uses dark magic again, explaining that thanks to malignant wisdom, he can now copy attacks simply simply by witnessing them, blasting the door apart with a small sphere of magic and ordering the undead to wipe out every dark wizard living there. And not far away, an explosion sends several of Hans's soldiers flying, catching his attention just as an old magician appears, demanding to know what he did with the immortal fragment. And Hans answers evenly that since they left him without a heart, he had no choice but to find a replacement, adding with quiet confidence that what he found works surprisingly well, which enrages the old man enough to raise his hand and invoke the finger of death, striking Hans head-on and blowing off one of his arms, prompting Hans to angrily protest being attacked mid-conversation, only for the old man to snap back that all the effort and resources invested in the fragment were now wasted. And when the old man follows up with a Thorn of Darkness attack, Hans blocks it with a dark magic membrane, arrogantly declaring that he is now the bearer of that power. And even though it hurts, the strength he desired finally belongs to him. Malcolm struck again without hesitation, unleashing a spell he called Ectoplasm Rupture, and Hans blocked it once more, calmly remarking how irritating it was to constantly announce the names of every skill he used, then coldly declaring that now he would finish off, without mercy, the one responsible for killing Alfred, which briefly confused the old man until he was forced to interrupt his thoughts to block a barrage of attacks coming from behind, and clearly irritated by how much stronger his enemy had become, he finally decided to reveal his ultimate move, raising his hand and chanting the Pact of Destruction, a horrifying spell that ripped the souls from every dark wizard present and fused them into a twisted black crown known as the Crown of Sorrows. And seeing his own companions slaughtered just to gain more power enraged Hans, who called him a coward. And before the old man could complete another incantation, Hans pierced straight through his chest, mockingly repeating how annoying his habits were and adding that he wanted to end this quickly because he had already learned enough. And with bitterness in his voice, the old man uttered his final words, saying he never imagined dying before a useless skeleton he himself had created, while Hans, satisfied he had kept his promise, lifted his gaze to the sky and quietly asked if she had seen it, hoping that now she could finally rest. And elsewhere, a young girl praying before a statue suddenly widened her eyes, rushing to report that the immortal king was about to return, prompting the bishop to grasp the danger and immediately warn the city, while the girl, staring seriously at the sky from her window, swore she would not allow that catastrophe to repeat itself, that she would not let so many lives be taken again. And returning to Hans, he calmly noted that although he had lost many soldiers, it was nothing he could not replace. Though first he needed his arm back, so he wandered until he found a suitable skeleton, tore off its arm, and adapted it using super recovery, then set about rebuilding his forces, struggling at first as uncontrolled dark energy shattered several bodies. Yet he persisted until he gained better control and formed new soldiers. Though he disliked ruining so many specimens, and turning back to the old man's corpse with a cruel smile, he attempted to extract information from the soul, only to fail because the man had no soul at all, likely removed by some secret organization to hide its truths. But even so, Hans enslaved the soulless body and forced self-awareness into it. And when the new servant politely introduced himself, Hans was startled and punched him on instinct, declaring that even if he could not remember now, he would never forgive the atrocities committed and would torment him as punishment, then demanded his cane, which the servant obediently handed over. And later Hans noticed a pile of skeletons and recognized the zombie who had helped him escape before, thanked him sincerely, and released him from dark magic so he could reunite with his family. And back in his main body, Hyun relaxed while eating fried chicken and drinking cola, pleased with everything, checking gold prices because Hans had found a massive supply and Hyun planned to enjoy life. Then he summoned Hans only to joke that the skeleton turned on him and killed him, immediately canceling the summoning because his mind could not withstand Hans's overwhelming aura. And realizing he needed Hans for the gold, he opened the karma shop and noticed his points had nearly doubled, quickly spending some to enhance his unique skill, strengthening his mind and gaining the serenity trait, which allowed him to stand beside Hans without pressure, even acknowledging how conveniently everything worked for the story, though he ignored it and sold the loot, shocking merchants with the quantity and telling them to deposit it all, while secretly hiding Hans in the shadows just in case, which proved wise when raiders suddenly attacked the area and fled boasting of their heist, leaving Hyun frozen in shock until a wolf knocked him aside. And despite the terror reminding him of his past accident, he refused to give up, while the villains bragged they had time before guards arrived, only to panic when their portal man collapsed unconscious. And as they tried to revive him, Hans emerged, declaring that while Hyun might not be able to act, he could. And moments later, guards arrived to find the attackers already defeated, unknowingly missing Hans, who slipped away in shadow mode. And relieved, Hyun reflected that delivering justice once in a while was not so bad. And later, Heinz arrived in the medieval city of Azanthu in the western kingdom of Thalia, remarking bitterly that Malcolm had not lied. But his motivation faltered when he realized how empty the place felt, soon witnessing thugs extorting a girl, a familiar cliche, and when she collided with him while escaping, he politely accepted her apology and hired her as a guide for 2 silver coins, learning her name was Diana, an orphan working to care for her younger brother, paying her and asking for her help again, seeing it as helping someone rather than being scammed. And the next morning he woke tired to find find her waiting outside, scolded her for sleeping there only to be called old man, which strangely pleased him, and she saved bread for her brother, while Heinz explained the city's location and noticed strange symbols carved everywhere, realizing they were made of blood when Diana bluntly said so, deflecting his curiosity by teasing him about his food and leading him into an alley to show what she had smelled. And days later, Heinz waited for her far too long, growing uneasy, only to be confronted by the same thugs as before, paying them off to avoid trouble, but noticing their markings matched those symbols and recalling Diana's warning about that organization. And when one thug mentioned the cruel fate awaiting the child they captured, those words echoed painfully as Heinz demanded they stop to talk, just as Diana appeared, sealing his fate for daring to challenge them. And by face, I truly mean everything he had, because to avoid another fight, the young man chose to hand over all his belongings. And although anger flared inside him and he almost blamed the girl for everything that had gone wrong, he stopped when he saw her lowered gaze and trembling voice as she revealed that her younger brother had gone missing. And in that instant, Heinz understood exactly who those men had been talking about. So he told her the truth without hesitation, causing her to collapse to her knees in disbelief. And as he tried to calm her by saying they could pay any amount to get him back, she shook her head hopelessly and said money no longer mattered, because if her brother had fallen into their hands, his fate was already sealed, since what those people wanted was blood. A statement that stunned Heinz and pushed her to finally confess the hidden truth that the city itself was nothing more than a food warehouse for vampires. And while her words settled heavily, far away in the ruins, Hans had left behind a shadowy figure, cursed his late arrival due to the immortal king's fragment, though he was confident he would find it soon. And back in the city, the girl explained that the vampire organization ruling the area was called Varkoslak, controlling not just this city but many nearby, making escape pointless, and that she and her brother had always been waiting for this day, yet she could not accept it happening now. And hearing this, Heinz steadied himself and told her she needed to act, because if things were truly that dire, they had no time to waste and had to save the boy immediately. Though she doubted he could do it alone, prompting Heinz to calmly reply that he was not alone at all, and causing trouble for bad people happened to be his specialty. And at the same time, those very men were gambling away the coins they stole from him, laughing about how easy it had been, until the door opened and Heinz stepped in, drawing everyone's attention, one thug rising to greet him mockingly and asking if he had come to donate more money, casually introducing him to the others and even asking whether he had bribed the guards outside. But Heinz cut through the noise with a cold demand, saying he would not ask twice and wanted to know where the child was. And when no answer came, he drove his blade into the man's throat without hesitation, leaving only two stunned attackers who rushed him. And Heinz met them head-on, trusting his durability and recovery, pushing one back while the other stabbed him, or at least tried to, because the dagger failed to pierce the reinforced vest beneath his clothes. And as Heinz asserted his advantage, he almost missed the final attacker aiming for his head, until a shield appeared out of nowhere to block the shot, allowing him to counter and end them both, later explaining that the shield came from a magic item he carried and that he had not even used his full arsenal, though his confidence was quickly punished when more enemies appeared, forcing him into a prolonged fight that he barely survived, regenerating through wounds and finally pinning one man beneath his boot to demand the child's location, only to be threatened with talk of a powerful boss arriving soon, which exhausted Heinz's patience and earned the man a swift beheading. And after searching the base, he found the terrified boy, reassured him that his sister had sent him and that it was time to leave, just as a bat landed nearby and transformed into a vampire, demanding to know who dared steal his food, mocking whether Heinz was bound by some vow or merely the brother of his meal. And Heinz calmly claimed to be a stranger who stumbled into trouble and rescued a child by coincidence, a lie the vampire pretended to accept before attacking viciously, forcing Heinz to shield the boy as they crashed through the floor, landing among barrels of alcohol. And though Heinz was relieved by the soft landing, he panicked when the boy briefly went still, only to be urged to flee without looking back, while the furious vampire lunged again, overpowering Heinz despite his defenses, tearing off his arm and warning that resistance only made him tastier. And when the vampire tried to feed, Heinz ignited another hidden magic tool, setting the area ablaze, chasing the enemy across the alcohol-soaked floor until the vampire struck him in half. Yet even then, Heinz stayed conscious, using a headbutt to knock the creature down and triggering a massive explosion that burned the vampire to ashes, leaving Heinz barely alive but satisfied his mission to help the girl was complete. And outside, she witnessed the fire as a system notification confirmed the avatar's death and imposed a 7-day cooldown. And the next day, she was polishing shoes when a familiar voice asked for her service, and upon seeing Heinz, she embraced him in relief, only for him to say lightly that he was not someone who died so easily, though inwardly admitting that this body was new, that Heinz had truly died, and he had created Heinz too because disappearing from her life felt wrong. And after the reunion, she warned him to leave since vampires were hunting him relentlessly, but he assured her he had already taken care of it. And yet while resting at the inn, a vampire in animal form watched him, and as Heinz checked the karma shop, he realized he was under a 10-day transmission penalty, and before he could react, the bat crashed through the window, transforming midair and grabbing him by the neck, slamming him against the wall and whispering that she had been tracking him for a while. furious that he dared kill one of hers within her territory, and as Heinz struggled to breathe and found her grip unbreakable, she leaned closer, sniffed him slowly, and remarked with confusion that she felt absolutely nothing from him. Dark traces of shadowy energy leak from his body, and she realizes she cannot smell the blood of his family on him at all. And seizing that gap, the young man scolds her for grabbing the wrong person, saying all he has done is sleep in that place. Yet she bares her fangs and coldly warns that she will question him properly, and before he can react, she bites him, releasing him just as quickly, leaving him writhing in unbearable pain as she calmly explains that from now on, he will be unable to lie to her. And in that brutal moment, Heinz feels his body change, fangs emerging as his race forcibly mutates into that of a vampire, and with commanding authority, she demands to know whether he belongs to or is connected with the vow of defiance, triggering an overwhelming urge to answer, yet just before he betrays himself, his mental center blocks the compulsion, and he insists he has nothing to do with those people and is merely a traveler, which disappoints her slightly as she turns away, admitting it is rare for her to be mistaken, but that for now he seems truthful, and deciding they have other matters to attend to, while Heinz quickly realizes this is the perfect chance to learn more about how this world truly functions. And later they arrive at a grand mansion, the Varkoslak clan's branch in the city, where numerous lesser vampires bow deeply before Lord Wyrak, who frowns at the sight of Heinz accompanying a lesser blood. And just then, a beautiful vampire appears, warmly embracing Heinz and teasing him about being recently bitten, and though hesitant, he answers honestly and introduces himself, earning her affection as she offers him fresh blood, which awakens a violent thirst that he suppresses by blocking his senses, drinking without losing control, while she casually remarks that if she had turned him herself, she would have drained him completely because of how appealing he is, prompting Heinz to nervously ask what being a lesser blood actually means. And she explains that lesser bloods are like knights, pure bloods like Wyrak are nobility, above them true bloods, and at the top holy bloods, more myth than reality. And as Heinz thanks her for the lesson, Wyrak interrupts everyone to announce that the immortal king's fragment cultivated by the vow of defiance has vanished, though he reassures them it is still in the city and orders a full search, shocking Heinz as he recalls Hans took it. And hours later, Heinz and the girl patrol the streets under the weakening sun, discussing how the fragments were meant to be fused here, confirming more fragments exist somewhere in the city, though she does not know where. And later, as Heinz serves Diana dinner, she reveals she might know the location, explaining she once cleaned a tomb frequented by Varkoslak members that radiated malevolent power, which intrigues Heinz enough to investigate. Yet before leaving, Diana stops him, noticing his changed scent, and when he shows her his fangs, she feels guilty and offers herself as food if it helps him, only to be punched lightly as he scolds her to stop being dramatic and focus on giving him the tomb's location, while elsewhere, a wounded man is challenged by a vampire with the promise of freedom if he lands one hit, only to be immobilized and drained. And when the vampire orders another sacrifice, intruders arrive and slaughter his men, provoking his fury until a dark attack strikes him head-on, and Hans appears, silently unleashing undead forces, turning their destruction into fuel for even stronger attacks. And as Heinz shouts a warning about incoming reinforcements, the vampire is bitten from behind by Heinz himself, who ignores warnings about cannibalism, shattering his mind, because he is no ordinary vampire and instead grows stronger, gaining blood magic and using it to destroy the altar holding another fragment, which Hans urges him to do quickly. And after the explosion, Heinz seizes the second fragment, overwhelming even the mental center, forcing all clones to pour their power into Hans to prevent corruption. And as a massive beam erupts through the roof, Wyrak realizes Hans now holds two fragments, ordering an attack that fails instantly as Hans obliterates most enemies, evolving further into a form too powerful to name. And elsewhere, observers mistake the dark surge for fire, warning higher powers that the immortal king's resurrection is near. While back at the battlefield, Wyrak desperately tries to flee, only to be pierced and reduced to nothing more than a sack of blood, questioning how Hans mastered both fragments, until Heinz appears behind him and silences him forever, evolving from lesser to pure blood and vowing to hunt all vampires as Varkoslak members flee, Pirita lamenting Wyrak's death yet acknowledging he faced an impossible foe. And in the city, a man curses his alliance with vampires before Hans appears and ends his screams. And later, Heinz leaves the city with Diana and her brother, feeding them warmly and promising comfort, while Hans raises his army, storing them in his pocket dimension and noting that one day such power might even reach Earth, until a blood arrow strikes him, and a vampire claiming kinship with Wyrak declares his intent to kill him, calling Hans a vile thief, unaware that his fate is already sealed. So friend, if you enjoy this and want next chapter, so don't forget to like and leave the comment for part 2.